everyone. But yeah, back to 2005, everybody, this time. And Doctor Who was born again in the form of very well-respected, deadly serious, deadly northern actor Christopher Eccleston as the Ninth Doctor. When Christopher Eccleston was announced as the man who'd lead this revival of Doctor Who, that was in the April of 2004, it seemed very left field. If not a gamble, it was certainly a surprise. And the bookies, those infamous bookies, they'd been way off base with their, in inverted commas, their favourites. Safe money had been on characters like Alan Davies, Eddie Izzard, Bill Nighy. For certain types of people who were very outwardly, if not eccentric, certainly very sort of Doctor-ish. They'd either got the hair, the wardrobe, or the attitude, or a mixture of two or three of the above, really. For better or worse, Doctor Who's destiny was eventually in the hands of the 40-year-old actor who'd worked with Russell T Davies before, of course. He'd also been off to Hollywood and roared around with Nick Cage in Gone in 60 Seconds. I've still not seen that movie. He got spooky with Nicole Kidman in The Others and worked with Danny Boyle and Jimmy McGovern several times, two of the 90s most important writers and directors. One can see, though, now how an actor like Christopher Eccleston, Sarah, he may have reached the mid-noughties and felt like he needed a fresh challenge. And by his own admission, the Doctor was unlike any character that he'd ever played. Had you ever seen this actor before when you started watching Doctor Who?
Yeah, I'd seen him in Gone in 60 Seconds. It's really good fun. You should check it out. I mean, I had to suffer through his performance of Jude at college. And oh God, it's depressing. Very good.
That's the movie he made with Kate Winslet, isn't it? From
the
the
both
90s?
excellent.
Thomas Hardy novel.
It's very
That's,
bleak.
in fact, isn't David Tennant in that with him? They're in the same scene, aren't
Yes. Oh yeah. I'd forgotten about that.
they? Yeah.
I
Prepared for everything here on Type 40.
I'd seen him in the Second Coming, and yeah, a really good actor. A big name, big respected actor. But obviously, I'd not really had any real thoughts because at this point, Doctor Who was really far removed. I know the most I knew was probably Tom Baker. Being in Little Britain, I'm like, oh, he was Doctor Who once. He had the scarf and the jelly babies, and that's about kind of all I knew, apart from the Paul McGann movie, which obviously was a few years back. So it wasn't really something I was particularly thinking about until it was advertised. On the billboards and interviews. I remember an interview with him, which I think you're going to mention a bit, on the BBC Breakfast News, where he was talking about filming, and he was saying about the first day he had to chase a pig in a spacesuit. I thought, wow, this sounds really wacky.
Wild. Literally wild.
Yeah. This sounds interesting. I'm probably more interested in Billy Piper, to be quite honest, because I'd got poster over on my wall and I'd got all of his CDs, so that's kind of...
Oh, really? You were a fan? You were a Billy Piper fan?
I was a Billy fan, yeah, I know all the dances.
I hadn't got any of her CDs, Stephen, but I did have her calendar up in the toilet. I don't mind telling you.
He always raises the tone.
He really does, yeah.
Raises it, yeah.
It could be said, Stephen, that Chris Eccleston, in taking the role of the Doctor, that could be a bit of a gamble. Not only had the show been off for such a long period of time, and it still had a kind of stigma attached to it. The papers were getting behind Paul Daniels to play this role, for heaven's sake. So there was that one. So there was that. But Chris Eccleston
with the lovely Debbie as his companion. That would have been fantastic.
If only. That would have sold it for me.
Absolutely.
If she'd have done it in hot pants, obviously. But Oh God, we've got
I
everybody.
bring Jude. He brings hot pants and
I
calendar.
know.
Yeah, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, dingle the cloister bell.
Something for everybody here, isn't it? Something
Yeah.
for everybody. Yeah.
I'd like to think so, mate.
Suits
I'd like
all
to think so.
tastes.
Yeah, but what I was trying to get round to in my sort of clumsy way was the fact that Christopher Eccleston, at this point in his career, he was doing something. I wouldn't call it a handbrake turn, but it's very different, isn't it, to playing a psycho in Shallow Grave, which I feel he stole that film from Hugh McGregor. It was so intense. So from doing that to playing the hero in a family adventure serial on a Saturday evening. How do you feel about that? Not just as an actor, but as a viewer. Were you surprised when Chris Eccleston was cast? Because the papers really were, weren't they?
I suppose so. I mean, you know, the whole business of the show coming back was a very sort of ambivalent making experience at the time.
How do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
I suppose because I got used to the wilderness years, and something about it not being on the telly, and
do you think we became, as a fan base, institutionalized by that?
It seemed inconceivable. It had become inconceivable through the 90s that it would ever come back, and that if it did come back, they'd probably make a hash of it. I wasn't one of the handful of people who were hugely impressed by the McGann film at the time. It just seemed, they're just going to bring it back, and it's just going to be a recipe for being, irritated, disappointed, and ridiculed all over again for being associated. So
another indignity, Stephen. Another indignity. Why do they keep doing it to this old show?
Heaping indignity upon indignity, and so it become quite cozy in the 90s to have your collection of VHSs.
To know that there was a beginning and an end, and that was that. It was. Yeah.
And it was there, and it was in the past, and nobody could do it any more damage. And so then the news started to come through, and then it was Russell T Davis, who was about as tasty a sort of a TV practitioner as there was at the time, wasn't he? Very, very sort of cool and hot, and all those words, all those contradictory words that describe somebody being really good at something. And so you think, oh right, okay, and then the names started trickling through, and no name that came up, and then I started to think, it's a really difficult part to cast, this, isn't it? And Tom Baker used to say, nobody's ever been miscast as Doctor Who. Well, that was when he was Doctor Who, and there were only 3 before him, after that, there was that sketch. Do you remember that sketch that they cut that bit out of on one of the Doctor Who night sketches? Where
yes, I do. Yeah,
you know the line I'm talking about.
Sylvester McCoy was quite rightly upset by it, wasn't he? Personally, he felt very upset.
Any blank with an equity card was the line.
Yeah, it's Mark Gates penned that, hadn't he? With one of his League of Gentlemen.
When it went out, that was hilarious. That line. But obviously not. If you were one of the 80s Doctors, it would seem less amusing. And so names coming through, and that Richard E. Grant was named a lot, as you said. Bill Nighy was named a lot, and I just sort of couldn't get my head around any of the names. And then when it started, when it actually was on, and Eccleston was doing it, I was working with David Warner at the time, and he talked about how I was doing production of King Lear with David Warner. And he was talking about how, he'd talked to them about doing it and how much he would have liked to have done it. And I remember thinking, well, he'd be great in an old school sort of, if you were thinking about how it was done in the classic era, to cast a really strange older man.
Because Peter Davison has often said that David Warner, in many respects, would have made the ultimate Doctor Who, hasn't he? And he's not alone in thinking that. You can see that just as you describe.
But as I was talking about last time when you were on the podcast day one, about the canniness of Davis and obviously all those other people, Jane Tranter and Lorraine Heggessy and Mal Young, this sort of cabal of 21st century, TV supremos who are absolutely determined to make this damn thing work to try. Can we redo that Hook on an early Saturday evening? And we've got to remember, looking at the documentation about this and the vetoes, the things that were absolutely verboten. We do not have some twonk dressed in Victorian clothes, with the eye candy dolly bird. We've got to place the companion center stage and get all those demographics of younger people and women, for God's sake, and anything to stop people turning over to what was on the other side, Anton Deck, wasn't it? I think on ITV.
Anton Deck.
And so when the name Eccleston arrived, I thought that's genius, even though aesthetically it wasn't what for me personally. Well, I just want them to go on making Pyramids of Mars and Talons of Wen Chiang for the rest of the time. I want the Doctor to be a middle-aged, bloke with a posh voice, very Tom Baker, basically, in his early in the Hinchcliffe years, and a sort of permutations on the Robert Holmes Gothic horror thing. But that wasn't gonna win over the audience
in
2005. So you get the actor, probably more than any other actor, associated with gritty drama. I knew him from Let Him Have It, which was a film about the Bentley and Craig case, like the bloke who was
breakout role in many respects, wasn't it?
Execute areas. God, look at him. It's about 12.
Wow.
And a series that my father had just thought was fantastic. It was a Jimmy McGovern series in 1998 called Hearts and Minds, about where he played a character called Drew Mackenzie. He was doing a very good Liverpool accent, as a sort of a conviction-minded teacher who goes into an inner city school determined to be a good teacher. I remember the first episode. There was an extraordinary scene where he was reciting this John Masefield poem and bringing it to life, the rhythm of it, to the language and the rhythm, to the kids. Electric performance. And so thinking about that and thinking, if you're going to try and make this character relevant to a modern audience, you probably couldn't do better than an actor like Christopher Eccleston, who has working class, social drama printed through him like a stick of rock. This is going to make people go, oh, and make all those, old Supremos of the BBC, all the ones who cancelled it or whatever, sit up and take notice, and the audience take notice. How he felt about it as a career move, I've no idea. He must have thought, well, this is an avenue I've never gone down before. It must have seemed artistically interesting to. I think he talked about he liked the idea of getting involved in children's drama, or something that was something that wasn't hard hitting social realism.
He liked the idea of acting for children, specifically for children, not families, specifically for children, which I suppose, again, I think we've spoken a little bit before. I mean, certainly you and I have, Sarah, and I think we have too, Stephen, privately, about this sort of mystique that we as the audience put around actors. And I think it was there, obviously, before social media and before tabloid newspapers. I'm thinking right the way back to proper old Hollywood in the 50s, where there were screen idols, that expression, screen idols. There's this mystique around them and around the craft of acting, which has absolutely sort of diluted a little now. But with a person like Christopher Eccleston, his choices were always, I wouldn't say they were particularly all over the map. I hope he wouldn't think this is a great disservice, but to the person sat on the sofa, there was a Chris Eccleston part. He's usually northern, very, very serious. And a certain kind of part that you'd always find him in, and he'd always be magnificent in them. But I suppose and he would inhabit the part so entirely, but to the extent that afterwards his name wouldn't necessarily, Sarah, it wouldn't stay with one after the fact. And I'm not sure whether somebody who's a craftsman working in that field, whether he would think, no, that's right, because I want you to remember the character, not to latch on to my star quality. That surely means he's successful, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, I would have said so. But yeah, I think he picked his parts pretty, he took it seriously. He wouldn't just take anything. He was always got that sense of pride, and that's why he tended towards certain projects.
Well, there's two things. Well, that's Cracker, isn't it? And our friends in the north. Now, what's the timing of those two things compared to
Cracker?
Our friends in the north was 95, I think.
That's right.
It was probably just after that Hearts and Minds thing. Was the Cracker before that? Was that 94?
Cracker was 92, 93. He
Was
got
it that
Cracker
early?
in the wake of the success of Let Him Have It. He was still a very young actor to be playing Detective Inspector David Bilborough in that. He was Cracker's superior, and that's where I first saw him. Took notice of him, but obviously there were.
And he was killed off by Robert Carlyle, was he?
Yeah, absolutely. Electrifying television. I rewatched it all quite recently. I was still affected by it exactly the same way. But Alan Bleasdale, Jim and McGovern, these writers, they were right up there then, weren't they? I think they have peers, but I don't think they necessarily have any betters. No. I would put Russell T Davies probably in that bracket now, and maybe Alan Bennett and people like that, the tried and sort of tested names from decades before. But these writers, they're the ones who were riding the crest of a wave, weren't they, in the 90s? And anybody who got into their productions got eyes on them. It wouldn't say it necessarily made them stars and guaranteed them longevity, but enabled them to show pretty great range, Stephen. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Eccleston was inspired to be an actor by watching Boys in the Black stuff as a kid, which was probably the defining early 80s left-wing social realist comedy drama, because it had sort of a comedic elements in it, but it was hard hitting, and it was. And
got everybody talking, didn't it? I mean, I was very,
do you remember
very young
it?
At the time. I was very, very young. I mean, the only reason that I knew about it is because of that character who go around headbutting everybody, Yozza Hughes. Yeah. All the kids at my primary school and nursery started headbutting one another. Yeah. So, I'm not sure how they found out about it, because it was on about 9 or 10 o'clock. Yeah. But I think the parents, it captured something. It entered the popular lexicon, I suppose, and you can see why somebody like Chris Eccleston was stimulated by it. I mean, he was born in 1963 in February in Salford, Lancashire, and he'd been the head boy at his school, but he'd found acting quite suddenly in his late teens. And just as you say, Stephen, it was watching things like that on the television, populist but hard-hitting stuff that switched him on and made him think, oh yeah, this is something that somebody like me could do. And he found his way through drama school and worked in classical theatre for a time, which seems strange when you think about the things that stimulated him. He did end up playing in a lot of classical productions, but he would drift in between day jobs as well, Sarah. So he worked in supermarkets, he worked on the building sites, just like Tom did, and for a while he was a nude model for artists. So he'd done quite a lot before that breakout year in 91. I think he did an episode of Inspector Morse, which I still haven't seen. Well, Troughton was in that as well, wasn't he? A couple of years, but there he was in Inspector Morse, and that was the same year that he got Let Him Have It, and it sort of went from there. I wouldn't say it went stellar, but you can see the choices that he made. They were very much. There was very much a through line through them. Like I say, he wasn't all over the map, but Chris Eccleston had arrived, and he was an actor. As I say, when I saw him in Cracker. And it was partly because of that very visceral, heart-rending death, Stephen. But that really stayed with me. I was in my teens when that broadcast, and I thought, God, this guy, this actor, I've never seen him before, but I hope I see him in more things. I think Shallow Grave was the next thing I saw him in.
When you heard that he was cast as the Doctor, how did you feel about the cast? That's the specificity of the casting as Doctor Who.
That's the irony of it. Despite the fact that he'd moved me to tears in Cracker, and he terrified me in Shallow Grave, I was completely and utterly nonplussed about Chris Eccleston being cast as the Doctor. I just couldn't see it. I had no idea why they'd gone for him. I read about this on the BBC News website. Shows how times change. And I didn't see it on Blue Peter or on the news. I didn't read it in DWM or anything like that. I read it on the BBC's own website there. Shallow Grave actor Christopher Eccleston has been named as the new Doctor Who to front the cult BBC sci-fi show when it returns next year. So a simple couple of paragraphs that they set my imagination alight in some respects, but I was absolutely terrified by this because I liked him. I knew who he was, but I think I was in the minority and I couldn't see him as the Doctor. So how would anybody else? So I was fearful of this, Stephen. I don't mind admitting.
Were you? I think you were talking about this on another podcast of yours that I was watching, and that you were very, very enthusiastic about the show coming back. And there was a friend of yours who wanted it to fail.
Yes, that's right.
Was he a Doctor Who fan or not?
No, he was about 6 or 7 years younger than me. So I think he'd grown up with the show when Colin and Sylvester were doing it. So he'd come to it when the BBC themselves was sort of sabotaging it, and so it had that really unjustified stamp of failure about it, and he viewed it as a show just like Crossroads that was a good one to have as the butt of jokes.
Well, it became a national joke, hadn't it? You know, during its decline and then throughout the 90s, it had just become as though we were all. It was reported in the press. It was recollected in the public imagination. It seemed as something that even as children we were watching, being aware of it being crap. As though we were watching it with a sort of kitsch sensibility, enjoying it for its sort of camp nonsensical values, which of course was a word beginning with B. I'm not going to use now. So you were very enthusiastic, and this is gonna take off, and you had great faith in it, and then the name, and then Chris Eccleston's name came, and you thought, hang on a minute, how the hell does that work? Because I associate him with social realist drama, not with this character who is in no way located in any of the places that I've seen him.
He seemed, Stephen, so contemporary. I couldn't imagine him as the man out of time, if you follow me. Whereas I think all the previous Doctors, all 8, had that kind of edge to them. At that time, I'd been measured. I'd managed my expectations really, really strictly when it came to this. Because obviously I didn't know. I knew Russell was involved, and I'd liked his stuff. Most of it, I'd really liked it. I loved Bob and Rose, The Second Coming, all that stuff. So I believed in Russell, but I thought, what are they? But it wasn't just about who they put in it. I thought there were so many variables to this Sarah. Who else was going to be writing it? You know, if it was going to be just anybody that they dragged out of a dole queue, then what was? So there were so many variables, so many ifs and buts. I refused to let myself get too excited until the thing started to take shape, and I was hoping that the first thing that would connect was be the casting, and this didn't. It just made me even more nervous because he wasn't any kind of personality either. Nobody really knew. Even the people who heard of him didn't really know who he was, and I think that continued until he started appearing, making very sparse appearances on the chat shows and the magazine programs of the day. Should we take a look at one now? Yeah. Say yes. Say yes.
Yes.
Passions run high in science fiction circles when talk turns to who has the necessary qualifications to play that Time Lord. Yes, Doctor Who is coming back, and after much speculation, it's been revealed that none other than Christopher Eccleston is to play him.
Very good choice. I'll have to say that because he's sitting on a settee, but I think that anyway. Morning to you.
Morning.
It's his very first interview since the news was announced.
Hello.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a fantastic job, isn't it? You must have been very excited when you were given that.
I was very excited, particularly because of the writer, who's Russell T Davies, because I've always chosen my work on the strength of the scripts, and I worked with Russell on Second Coming, and I do think the most important thing about any television project is the writer and the script. And we've got some fantastic scripts. So very excited.
Big shoes to follow in. When we look at the people who've done it in the past. Daunting?
Not at all, no, because I know we've got the writing, and that gives me that gives me a safety net. If it, you know, I have that to rely on. So I'm reasonably confident that we can do a good job and honour his past and also bring him into the 21st century, which is what we want to do.
Well, how are you going to bring him into the 21st century?
Well, we're not going to wear scarves and hats for a start.
Are you not?
No.
Big question.
Despite your clip.
You've got to have a thing, Christopher.
Yes, you've got to have a thing.
I've got a thing. But
have you? What's your thing? Can you tell us?
Off camera.
It's going to be a surprise.
I remember that clip.
So you watched that at the time, did you?
I did.
And were you thinking, what was it, Dan? Were you thinking that accent? How can the Doctor be so specific? Because he's so Manchester there, isn't he? That clip. And I know. Okay, I'd heard him do like Hearts and Minds. He did a Liverpool accent, but he'd always had a working class northern accent. Whatever I'd seen him. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe there was maybe it was let him have it at Cockney. I don't think he spoke much to that character, but he was totally associated with very specifically parochial characters, wasn't he? And that was something in my mind. I thought, how is that voice going to sound like the Doctor? You know, but I was asking the question. Well, are my preconceptions of the Doctor too limited to an actor who has RP? Everybody who played it, with the exception of Sylvester McCoy, spoke RP, received pronunciation of some sort or another.
I think I assumed that Chris would do that as well, or would do a version of that, even though I knew that he was. I
think I had a feeling, knowing the sort of actor he was, that he would be the sort of who would be damned if he was going to do a posh accent, you know.
But you see what I mean there. I mean, we see him there talking to the late Bill Turnbull, a lovely interview there. I always thought Bill was a class actor. He passed away not that long ago. Right. And Sian Phillips there on BBC Breakfast. Yeah. And that's the first time I think I got a flash of his personality, Sarah. He'd been kind of unknowable at that time. He didn't do the "they think it's all over," and he never did the continuity announcements on Ant and Dec's Takeaway, anything like that. And yet you could see there, and that was fairly early on, and I did see that there are flashes of charm. There's a playfulness there. I wouldn't say that he's childlike in any way. He's a grown man, and he's clearly very serious about what he does, and very generous and very humble. But he's razor sharp, and he inspires. I think when he clearly believes in himself and them that much, it couldn't help but inspire some confidence in me, just enough to take it up a notch or so.
Yeah, I was going to say, did it help that because he was taking it so seriously?
It did.
Yeah.
It did, and over time, obviously, you know, I think Doctor Who fans, a lot of us were kind of slow to drop our guards, really, and it's understandable now, of course, that it may be a bit of a crime, come to think of it, that the departure of the actor from the role sort of overshadows everything that he did back then, even now, all this time on.
Well, the weird thing watching that is that presumably when he was doing that interview about starting, he already knew he'd left, didn't he?
Not then, no, because that was before he'd started. Yeah, that interview was before he started playing.
Oh, is that before even before he started filming?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
But I found that ultimately, you know, it was a very focused and original take on the character. It was very stratified. It was beguiling in the way that you'd want this alien character to be, and it did take the audience, took us, both the new fans and the returning fans, I suppose. It had a kind of do or die feel about it, I think, Steve, and it dragged us along, didn't it, through those 13 weeks across that spring and summer of 2005. It was so heady.
I never forget the day of the broadcast of Rose, and I was living in Highgate in North London, and Mark Elstob, who's, you know, works for Big Finish, I've talking about a lot, you know, connected me to Nick Briggs, I was going round to him and his wife's house. We were going to watch the first episode. I remember this. It was a beautiful day. Was it May? Was it
March.
early?
March
It was
26th. I'll
It was
never
a
forget that date.
glorious, early spring day or whatever. And I walked down Highgate, sort of north and hilly part of London. I remember walking down to Kentish Town, and there was one of those billboards at Kentish Town of Eccleston and Piper there, and thinking, this is the dawn of a new era for this program. Mark, who I was going round to watch it with, had been at drama school with Christopher Eccleston.
Really?
Central School. Yeah, and had a very funny story about how there was a play where Chris had to come on stage with a dog, and he came on stage with the dog, and the dog cocked its leg up and peed against his leg, and he had to drag it off. That possibly has never been told before. That's right. Anyway, but anyway, that was where I was going to watch it, and so going around the anticipation, rather like talking about 5 o'clock in the 70s, 7 o'clock became the 21st century 5 o'clock, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did.
7. Wasn't it on at 7 o'clock?
Yeah.
Bang on 7 o'clock, all 13 weeks, I
7
believe,
o'clock. I
Sarah.
remember looking at Mark and his wife's clock, their kitchen clock. I don't know why I say Mark and his wife's. It belonged to both of them, the clock, the rest of the whole house. And not anymore. And watching it ticking around, getting very, very excited. And I'd already seen the title sequence, and having been blown away by what a great homage that was to the Tom Baker title sequence, which was their cue for it and everything, and how it brilliantly melded Delia with the orchestral elements and beefed it all up and everything. It was just perfect. I don't think it's been bettered, actually.
Probably not.
That original
No, I don't
title
think it
sequence.
has.
Looking back, probably not.
I don't think they should ever have changed it. Anyway, and then it's starting, and there were moments that were sort of, I was going, and then it would go, because I so wanted it to be perfect, and it couldn't possibly be, and it was trying to do something in 45 minutes and getting that new audience over and that young audience and stopping them from turning over to Anton Deck or whatever. But there were bits. The burping bin was a shock. That was like, oh no, don't do that to me. I wanted to be taken deadly serious from start to finish, and that was my hope with Eccleston, that it was going to be, an intensely, seriously taken piece of drama, as it was in my recollection of Doctor Who at its best. But it was trying to tick so many boxes, and I remember getting to the end of that going, okay, yeah, I'll have to watch this objectively. I'll have to not get involved with it. I'll have to try and be analytical about it and look at it as a sort of a media studies exercise.
How'd you get on with that? Did it work?
Well, funnily enough, the one we're talking about tonight was one where I didn't have to, bolt on my sort of protective armor, because at times it would entirely seduce me, and other times it wouldn't, and I'd be taken in and out of it. But this, because the one we're going to talk about tonight was doing something that the old series had never done, never tried to do, and was doing it really and playing to the strengths of the actors. I thought, there's value in this revived series, things it's doing that the old series didn't, and that's fantastic. And I'm really excited to discover new dimensions in this program that I thought had exhausted its entire arsenal, and it hadn't.
And yet, from that moment on, and it didn't matter whether you were with friends or with family or with one's children, whether you were watching it with a tongue in your cheek, expecting it to fail like my old friend, or whether you were willing it to take flight, Sarah. It did, from the very first night, get people in front of the television again. More often than not, when I speak to people and hear anecdotes, Stevens, you hadn't told me that before, people connected and gathered together to watch this show come back, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe Sarah can tell us about what it was like to see it as somebody, a young adult or late teenager?
Mhm.
Or
You
were
were at
you,
university?
surely you're a child.
I was 19. Bless you.
You were at university, weren't you, when this was premiering?
Yes.
Were you?
So I was in my student digs.
Yeah.
Really annoyed my friends because we were supposed to be organising to get out because it was a Saturday night and lovely weather, and I was like, no, I want to see what this new show's about. And
What was it? What was it that lured you to it then? What was it?
it
What
was
was it?
the Trip of a Lifetime trailers that they did.
Right. Yeah.
I just
They
thought
were
yeah,
great, weren't they? Those trailers.
they were from
They were
both perspectives. Do you want to come with me? We're going to go on this adventure, and then Rosa's side. I've got a job, I've got a boyfriend, and then I've got the danger. I just thought this just sounds really cool and really interesting.
It was so simple, wasn't it, Sarah? A way of appealing to people, of connecting with people. You could immediately imagine that if not that they were you and you were them, you could think you were in their position. Everybody knew a girl like Rose.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when it first started, she's in this job. She's not particularly happy. It's not a particularly exciting life, but she's getting through it. And then all hell breaks loose. And it was just so well done. And the way it kind of, there was that trail of breadcrumbs, who is this doctor, and finding each other again, and him tracking him down and meeting Clive. And so you've got that element of mystery. And then obviously all the saving the world, and and Rose gives as good as she gets, as she's part of the solution. And it's just that ending part when he asks her, do you want to come with me? And she says no. And I've spoke before about what are you talking about? Why do you want to stay with Mickey?
Didn't you feel sorry for Noel Clark?
I did.
Of
No,
course.
because he was an arsehole in this one. I felt sorry for him later.
What, in the
He
first
was,
episode.
but again, Noel's Mickey, the way that he brought Mickey to life, he was really relatable as well, which is no
he
mean
was,
feat, because
and
he spent half of that episode as an automaton. He wasn't even actually playing Mickey.
Yeah.
Pizza. When
Pizza.
Noel left, I was so
Yeah.
upset. But at this point in time, now I was like, no, he don't care about you. He just wants to watch the football. Go off with this strange man.
It's also wonderfully considered from everybody on screen, I felt. I mean, and seeing this incarnation of the Doctor as well. Like I said, I'd seen him in costume in the tabloid newspapers, and that hadn't helped me get with this character and see what Eccleston was doing. But I decided that if this series that meant so much to me was going to have any impact, let alone any ideas of longevity again, I tried to keep all that out of my mind. I just kept my distance from it. I placed some faith, and I waited that time out between 2004 and the premiere, just with my fingers and toes all crossed. I needn't have worried. The irony ended up being that this Doctor connected with pretty much everyone, and in particularly me. This was an incarnation of the character that I saw a lot of myself in somehow. He may have taken a chance by taking this role, and I believe throughout that 13 weeks, even though there was a lot on the page from Russell and everybody else who was writing it, but I think Chris Eccleston continued to be very brave with it and challenging himself, perhaps with varying degrees of success. I think he's talked about that publicly as well. But this Doctor was a very sophisticated character, and that was regardless of the balance to each individual story. I think that this season was where I first started using the phrase, Sarah, that it's more than the sum of its parts. It had got the arc, and clearly they got all scripts in hand for Eccleston and everybody else to look into these characters and think, okay, I know where I can take this. I know how long I've got, and create a kind of magic. As cheesy as this sounds, I feel that it is absolute magic and proper TV gold. I have no hesitation at all in calling this classic Doctor Who now, even if it does make me feel really quite old, Stephen.
Well, it's almost inconceivable that it's now it is, as we said, 18 years ago, isn't it?
Yeah.
That this thing started, because it seems like yesterday. I wasn't won over by Rose, but I think I was won over by, it's a bit rather like the arc in space with Tom Baker for me. It was the second one, The End of Time. Something about conceptually as well, that the idea of taking the companion to see the Earth actually destroyed was an astonishing idea, and then that juxtaposition of her ringing Jackie from the end, the end of our time, basically, and she's that shot of Camille Kajuri put in the washing in as she gets the phone call 5 billion years. How many is it? 5 billion years.
5 billion years. Yeah.
That was that. I thought,
Something so mundane.
that's just beautifully mind blowing, and isn't sort of being flippantly dismissive in the Douglas Adams way of, you know.
I was just thinking of Adams, because it's got all the preposterousness, particularly the end of the world, because that was the episode that seduced me as well and made me think, oh yes, Doctor Who is back.
But it takes
all that preposterousness.
It takes a Douglas Adams idea, but then with the contrast with the housing estate and the mum, and playing that not for laughs, you know, as a sort of a crazy concept.
But it shortens that distance between us and what's going on the screen, doesn't it? Yeah. It moors it.
I was going to say it's that anchor. Yeah. My favourite scene in End of the World was when Rose actually stops and thinks and realizes what she's done, because I don't think that had really happened before in classic Who. No. People had just kind of just gone along with it, and all of a sudden she's a complete stranger.
Yes.
You know, where the hell am I? And I've introduced.
Oh, is that when she's talking to Ruffalo, the plumber?
That's a lovely scene.
I've got no idea who he is. Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah, brilliant.
There's a sounding board. I mean, I found really quickly that me placing the faith that I had, it was very well placed indeed, and the stories that aired throughout that crucial first season that restarted Doctor Who, almost without exception, they've become emblematic, really, of how to make great, compelling adventure television. They were talked about not just by the likes of us, but by the not we too, people who would probably never think to go out and buy one of the DVDs. Maybe they don't own a box set. Some of them might not have even watched it in the years in between.
It was cool to like Doctor Who.
It was very, very cool, and those things have stayed with people. How many times do you still hear, "Are you my mummy?" It is almost up there with Exterminate.
Oh yeah. I think as I was going through it and being sort of pulled this way and that by my feelings about it, and things I liked about moments, I thought, oh, that's too sentimental for my taste, or that's too goofy for my taste. But I kept finding moments like in End of the World with Jackie Tyler, the washing, that moment where that wonderful conversation she has with the Ruffalo character, or then in The Unquiet Dead, that extraordinary scene she has with the girl who then went on to be in Torch,
Gwen.
Gwen. That extraordinary sign of her psychically seeing what the modern world, what our world was like. And I think that's the first, and then she's the first to zone in on Pete Tyler's death, isn't she? That's the first mention of it. She knows that Rosie's dad's dead. Just watching a thing like that and go, oh, this is a dramatic scene that is utterly you would never find it in the old series. It's just it's never happened before. This is Doctor Who doing completely new things within sort of generic parameters. We always thought it could go anywhere in time and space, but you never thought it could go into particular areas of other, what you associate with other sorts of drama, you know. And that was as a word I used, as an epiphany about it. Oh God, it can go there, you know, and do it really well, and it not to sort of sit jarringly within the format.
They did it the very, very best, the very, very best they could, I think, Sarah. And there were time constraints to this, just the same as there'd been in the classic series. There were still budgetary constraints too, and actors' availability, and all manner of things. As it turns out now, as the books are finally being written about the dawn of New Doctor Who, there were so many pitfalls, I suppose, and things that they learnt on the fly. But to us, over that 13 weeks, getting this whole era in effect in such a small period of time in these tightly knitted together episodes, it just feels really, really special, doesn't it? Probably special in different ways for all of us, maybe.
Yeah, it's such a... I think because it's just that one season, unfortunately, it is... it feels very self-contained, and it does almost feel quite... Yeah, it's its own thing. Yes, it's part of New Who, but it's its own special thing as well. Yeah, I have such sentimental value for, because it was the one that got me back, but just memories of the time, just becoming absolutely obsessed with it every week and making people watch it. Like that, after Rose, and I watched it again when it was repeated on the Sunday, and then by the following week, I'd got my family watching End of the World, and I got my nan, my nephew, so completely different, and it became a regular thing. It was right, we'll have tea, and then we watched, and we did that for the full 13 weeks, and yeah, it was lovely.